At my grandson's birthday party, my seat was missing. My daughter-in-law said, "Oops, looks like we miscounted." Everyone laughed. No one defended me. I left quietly and simply canceled the checks. I'm glad to have you here. Follow my story until the end and comment the city you're watching from, so I can see how far my story has reached. I should have known something was wrong the moment I walked into that backyard. The decorations were perfect, blue and silver balloons tied to every chair, a superhero-themed cake that probably cost more than most people spend on groceries in a week, and tables arranged just so. Everything screamed expensive, which didn't surprise me since I'd been the one writing the checks. But as I approached the main table where the family was supposed to sit, my steps slowed. I counted the chairs once, then twice. 7 people, 6 chairs. "Grandma Harriet!" Byron came running toward me, his 8-year-old face bright with excitement. His Spider-Man costume was pristine, another thing I'd paid for without being asked. I hugged him tight, breathing in that sweet smell of childhood. But my eyes kept drifting back to that table. "Happy birthday, sweetheart," I whispered into his hair. "Are you having a good party?" "The best. Did you see the bounce house? And Mom got a magician coming later?" Of course she did. Nova never did anything halfway, especially when someone else was footing the bill. "Harriet, you made it." My daughter-in-law's voice was honey-sweet, but there was something underneath it I couldn't quite place. Nova glided over in her designer dress, the one I'd seen her charge to the credit card I helped pay off last month. Her smile was perfect, practiced. "We're so glad you're here." I gestured toward the table. "Where should I sit?" Nova's eyes followed my gaze, and for just a split second, I saw something flicker across her face. "Satisfaction?" Then she gasped, pressing her manicured hand to her chest. "Oh my goodness, I'm so embarrassed. We must have miscounted when we set up." The words hung in the air, miscounted, as if I were some last-minute addition, an afterthought they'd forgotten to plan for. "It's fine," I heard myself say, though my chest was beginning to feel tight. "I can grab a chair from—" No, don't be silly." Nova waved her hand dismissively. "There are plenty of seats at the other tables. You'll be more comfortable there anyway. Closer to the bar." She laughed, and a few of the other adults chuckled along. My son David appeared at her elbow, his arm sliding around her waist in that automatic way married couples do. He looked at the table, then at me, and I waited for him to say something, to ask why his mother didn't have a seat with the family. Instead, he smiled apologetically. "Sorry, Mom." You know how party planning gets crazy. Nova's been so stressed trying to make everything perfect for Byron. Stressed. Planning a party with my money had stressed her. I stood there for what felt like an eternity but was probably only seconds. The other guests were arriving, parents I didn't know dropping off children who would eat cake I'd paid for, while the birthday boy's grandmother was relegated to sitting with strangers. "Of course," I said quietly. "I understand." But I didn't understand. Not really. What I understood was that this wasn't an accident. The chairs had been counted carefully. 6 for the people who mattered, none for the woman who made it all possible. I made my way to one of the smaller tables, setting my purse down next to a woman I'd never met. She smiled politely and went back to scrolling through her phone. Around me, the party swirled on. Children shrieked with delight on the bounce house, adults clustered in groups, wine glasses in hand, chatting about soccer schedules and vacation plans. From my seat, I could see the family table clearly. Nova held court at the center, gesturing animatedly as she told some story that had everyone laughing. David nodded along, completely absorbed in his wife's performance. Byron sat between them, happy and oblivious, the little prince of this carefully orchestrated kingdom. And I sat alone, watching it all from the outside. My phone was heavy in my purse. I pulled it out, my fingers trembling slightly as I opened my banking app. The automatic transfers glowed on the screen like accusations. Mortgage payment, car payments, Byron's school tuition, Nova's credit card, payment after payment, month after month, year after year. All this time I'd thought I was helping. I thought I was being a good mother, a good grandmother. I thought my money was buying me a place in this family. Instead, it had bought me invisibility. The magician arrived to thunderous applause from the children. As he set up his equipment, Nova stood and clinked her wine glass with a fork. "Everyone, can I have your attention? I just want to thank you all for being here to celebrate our Byron's special day. This party wouldn't have been possible without—" She paused, her eyes scanning the crowd until they found mine. The smile never wavered. "Without all the love and support from family and friends." Love and support. Not a word about who had actually made it possible. I sat through the magic show, through the cake cutting, through the endless rounds of happy birthday. I watched my grandson blow out his candles and make a wish, probably for more toys or video games, things that money could buy. When the party finally wound down and parents began collecting their sugar-high children, I approached Byron to say goodbye. He hugged me fiercely, chocolate frosting still smeared on his cheek. "Thank you for my present, Grandma. I love the Lego set." "You're welcome, baby." I kissed the top of his head, breathing him in one more time. Then I looked up to find Nova watching us, her expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming, Harriet," she said, her voice perfectly cordial. "I'm sorry about the seating mix-up." Mix-up. The word tasted bitter in my mouth. I drove home in silence, my mind replaying every moment of the afternoon. By the time I pulled into my driveway, a strange calm had settled over me. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was done. Inside my house, I sat at my kitchen table with my laptop and began scrolling through my bank account. Transfer after transfer. Payment after payment. Thousands of dollars flowing out every month to support a family that couldn't be bothered to save me a chair. I started with the mortgage payment. Canceled. Then the car payments. Canceled. One by one, I methodically deleted every automatic transfer. Every recurring payment, every financial tie that bound me to people who saw me as nothing more than an open checkbook. When I was finished, I closed the laptop and sat back in my chair. Tomorrow, they would start to understand exactly what my love and support had been worth. And for the first time in years, I smiled. 3 days passed before the first call came. I was watering my small garden when my phone buzzed with David's name on the screen. I let it ring through to voicemail, then went back to my tomatoes. They, at least, appreciated the care I gave them. But the calls kept coming. David. Nova. Even Byron's school, probably wondering why the tuition payment was late. I ignored them all, and instead spent the evening with a bottle of wine and a calculator, doing something I should have done years ago, adding up exactly how much my family love had cost me. The numbers were staggering. It started small, the way these things always do. When David and Nova first got married 15 years ago, they were young and struggling. "Just help with the wedding," David had said. "Just the deposit on the house. Just until we get on our feet." 15 years later, they were still on my feet. Mortgage payment, $2,847 per month. I'd been paying it for 8 years. Ever since David's contracting business had hit a rough patch that never seemed to end. Nova's car payment, $651 per month for that luxury SUV she insisted she needed for safety when Byron was born. David's truck payment, $492 per month, because apparently contractors needed vehicles that cost more than some people's houses. Byron's private school tuition, $200 per month, because public school wasn't good enough for Nova's precious son. Utilities for their house, $300–400 per month, depending on how much Nova ran the air conditioning. Insurance payments, another $400 per month covering their cars and house. Groceries. Nova had gotten into the habit of texting me photos of her grocery receipts, always with some excuse about unexpected expenses, usually $800 to $1,000 per month. Credit card payments. This was the one that really made my hands shake. Nova's shopping habits had racked up debt that I'd been quietly paying down for years. Another $1,500 per month. Minimum payments on balances that never seemed to shrink because she kept spending. Vacations. The family trips to Disney World. The beach house rentals. The weekend getaways that Nova posted about constantly on social media. Always so grateful for family who support our adventures. Another $500–800 per month when averaged over the year. Medical expenses. Byron's orthodontist, Nova's dermatology appointments, David's physical therapy after he threw out his back-moving furniture instead of hiring movers. Whatever their insurance didn't cover, I did. Clothing. Nova's professional wardrobe for her part-time job at a boutique. Byron's constant need for new shoes and sports equipment. David's work clothes, more money flowing out every month. Home repairs and improvements. The new kitchen Nova had insisted they needed. The bathroom renovation. The landscaping. The pool maintenance. "It's an investment in the house, Mom," David would say, as if I'd ever see a penny of that investment back. When I finally reached the bottom of my calculations, I stared at the number until my eyes watered. Over the past 5 years alone, I had given them $387,000, nearly $400,000 of my late husband's life insurance, my savings, my retirement fund. For what? To sit alone at a stranger's table while they laughed with their friends? I poured another glass of wine and kept digging. There were the smaller things, too, the ones that added up without me really noticing. Birthday gifts that cost hundreds because Nova would hint about what Byron really wanted. Christmas presents that grew more expensive each year. Easter baskets that looked like toy store explosions. Halloween costumes that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Then there were Nova's emergencies. The time her laptop died and she needed a new one immediately for work. The time their water heater broke and couldn't wait for a repair estimate. The time Byron needed surgery for a broken arm and they were short on their insurance deductible. Always urgent, always necessary, always paid for by Grandma Harriet. I thought about my friends at the senior center, women my age who talked about budgeting their medications and choosing between heating and groceries. Meanwhile, I'd been funding a lifestyle that most people half my age couldn't afford, for people who couldn't even ensure I had a place to sit at their table. The really bitter part was how they'd made me complicit in my own exploitation. Nova was brilliant at making her requests sound like favors to me. "I know how much you love spoiling Byron," she'd say when hinting about some expensive toy or experience. "We just want to make sure he knows how generous his grandmother is." Or when she needed money for herself, "I saw this dress that would be perfect for Byron's school play, but it's a little out of our budget right now. You probably think I'm silly for caring so much about how I look, but I want Byron to be proud of his mom." She'd made me feel like the generous grandmother, the woman who could afford to help, the family member who loved them all so much she wanted to share her good fortune. What I really was, I now realized, was an ATM with feelings. David had been just as manipulative, but in a different way. He played the struggling son card, the man trying to provide for his family despite economic hardships that somehow never ended. "I hate asking, Mom," he'd say. "But Byron's counting on this vacation, and Nova's been working so hard." As if I were the solution to problems they'd created themselves. The worst part was that I'd bought into it all. I'd felt useful, needed, important. Every payment had felt like love, like I was taking care of my family the way a good mother and grandmother should. I'd even felt proud when Nova posted photos of their beautiful home, their happy family, their perfect life. Look what love can build, I'd think to myself. What I'd built was a prison of my own generosity. My phone buzzed again. Another call from David. This time, I answered. "Mom, what the hell is going on?" The mortgage payment bounced, and Nova's car got repossessed this morning. His voice was frantic, angry, accusing, not worried about me, not wondering if I was okay, just angry that the money had stopped flowing. "Hello, David," I said calmly. "How are you?" "How am I? Mom, we're in crisis mode here. The bank called about the mortgage. The school wants Byron's tuition. And Nova's crying because they took her car right out of the grocery store parking lot. What happened to the transfers?" I took a sip of wine, looking out at my garden where the evening light was turning everything golden. "I canceled them." Silence. "Then, you canceled them? What do you mean you canceled them?" "I mean, I went into my bank account and stopped all the automatic payments. It's quite simple, really. But you can't just do that. We depend on that money." And there it was, the truth he'd never said out loud before. "We depend on that money." "I know you do," I said quietly. "That's the problem. Mom, look. If this is about the seating thing at Byron's party, Nova explained that was just a mistake. She feels terrible about it. A mistake. Even now he was lying to protect her. Or maybe he'd actually convinced himself it was true. This isn't about one party. David, this is about the fact that you've both become so comfortable taking my money that you've forgotten I'm a person, not a bank account. That's not fair, Mom. We appreciate everything you do. Do you? I interrupted. Because from where I sit, I'm only valuable when I'm useful. When did you last call me just to see how I was doing? When did you last invite me over for dinner that you paid for? When did you last treat me like your mother instead of your financial advisor? He was quiet for a long moment. Then, Mom, you're being dramatic. We love you. You know that. But you can't just cut us off like this. We have obligations, responsibilities. So do I said. And my first responsibility is to myself. I hung up before he could respond. Within minutes, my phone was buzzing with text messages. Nova had joined the conversation now, and her messages were less diplomatic than David's call had been. Harriet, I don't know what's gotten into you, but this is cruel and unfair. Byron is going to suffer because of your selfishness. We never asked you to help us. You offered. You can't just change your mind and destroy our lives. I'm calling your doctor. This isn't normal behavior. You're not thinking clearly. I read each message with growing amazement. In Nova's mind, I was the one being unreasonable. I was the one being cruel. After years of taking my money and treating me like a second-class family member, she genuinely believed she was the victim here. But it was her last message that made me laugh out loud. What are we supposed to tell Byron when we have to take him out of his school and sell the house? What were they supposed to tell Byron? Maybe they could start with the truth. That they'd lived beyond their means for years, funded by a grandmother they'd taken for granted until the money dried up. Or maybe they could tell him that actions have consequences, and that treating people badly eventually catches up with you. As I got ready for bed that night, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years: peace. For the first time in decades, I wasn't worried about anyone else's problems, anyone else's needs, anyone else's crises. Tomorrow, I knew, they'd escalate. Nova would probably show up at my door. David would keep calling. They'd try guilt, anger, manipulation, every tool they'd used successfully for years. But I wasn't the same woman who'd left Byron's party 3 days ago. That woman had been desperate to belong, willing to pay any price for a place in her family. This woman? This woman had learned the difference between being loved and being used. And she was never going back. Nova arrived at my door exactly 1 week after I'd canceled the payments. I watched through my living room window as she sat in a taxi. Apparently, she hadn't managed to get another car yet, taking several deep breaths before stepping out. She'd dressed for battle. The black dress that always made her look serious and responsible, minimal makeup to appear vulnerable, and her hair pulled back in a way that screamed, "I'm a struggling mother." I let her knock 3 times before I answered. When I opened the door, her face immediately crumpled into what I'd learned to recognize as her performance tears, the ones that came on command whenever she needed something. "Harriet, thank God you're home. We need to talk." I didn't invite her in. Instead, I stepped out onto my front porch, crossing my arms as I faced her. "What can I do for you, Nova?" The question seemed to throw her off balance. She'd probably expected me to usher her inside, offer her tea, ask what was wrong. That's what the old Harriet would have done. "What can you do for me?" she repeated, her voice rising with indignation. "Harriet, you're destroying our family. Byron cried himself to sleep last night because we had to tell him he might have to change schools. Is that what you wanted? To hurt an innocent child?" There it was, the Byron card. She'd always known exactly which buttons to push, and my grandson had always been her most effective weapon. "What I want," I said calmly, "is for you and David to take responsibility for your own lives." Nova's face flushed red. "Responsibility? We've been working our asses off trying to build a life for our son. You think this has been easy for us? Asking for help? You think we enjoyed having to depend on you?" The lie was so brazen it took my breath away. "You enjoyed it enough to do it for 15 years. We didn't have a choice," she screamed, and I noticed my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, pause while getting her mail, clearly listening. Nova noticed too and lowered her voice, but the venom remained. "David's business has been struggling since the recession. I've been working part-time so I could be there for Byron. We've been doing our best with what we have. And what you have, I said quietly, has always included my money. So much so that you forgot it wasn't actually yours. Nova's mask finally slipped completely. You offered. Every single time you offered. You said you wanted to help. You said you loved taking care of your family. Don't act like we forced you. She was right, of course. I had offered. But what she conveniently forgot was how those offers had come about. The hints, the sighs, the carefully crafted stories about Byron's disappointments or their struggles, the way she'd made me feel selfish if I didn't immediately solve their problems with my checkbook. You're right, I said. And for a moment she looked relieved. I did offer, and now I'm unoffering. Her face went white. You can't do this to us. We have obligations, contracts. The mortgage company doesn't care about your hurt feelings, Harriet. They want their money. Then you'd better figure out how to give it to them. With what? She shrieked, abandoning all pretense of control. David's barely making enough to cover groceries. And my job pays peanuts. You know our situation? You've always known our situation. And there was the crux of it. I had always known their situation, which was that they'd built a lifestyle they couldn't afford and expected me to fund it indefinitely. They'd never even tried to live within their means because they'd never had to. Maybe you should get a better job, I suggested. Maybe David should expand his business or find additional work. Maybe you should move to a house you can actually afford. Nova stared at me like I'd suggested they move to Mars. We can't just uproot Byron. His whole life is here, his school, his friends, his activities. And David can't just magically make more money appear. But I can, I asked. Is that it, Nova? David can't make more money, but Grandma Harriet can just keep writing checks forever? That's different. You're retired, you don't have the same pressures we do. Your house is paid off, you don't have a child to think about. I have a grandson to think about, I interrupted. And what I think about is what kind of man he's going to become if he grows up watching his parents take advantage of an elderly woman and call it love. The words hit her like a physical blow. For a moment, she was speechless. Then the tears started again, but these looked real. How can you say that? We love you, Harriet. Byron adores you. You're his grandmother. And yet you didn't save me a seat at his birthday party. She flinched. That was a mistake. I told you we miscounted. Stop. My voice was sharper than I'd intended. Stop lying to me, Nova. Stop lying to yourself. You didn't miscount anything. You deliberately excluded me because you've gotten so comfortable seeing me as a wallet that you forgot I'm a person. We stared at each other across the chasm that had opened between us. I could see her calculating, trying to figure out what approach might work. The tears weren't effective. Anger had backfired. Guilt wasn't landing. What was left? Fine, she said finally, her voice cold. You want to play hardball? Let's play hardball. You cut us off, and you'll lose Byron. You'll lose your son. You'll lose your whole family. Harriet, is your pride really worth more than that? The threat hung in the air between us like a loaded gun. She was betting that my love for Byron would override everything else, that I'd cave rather than risk losing access to my grandson. 6 months ago, she would have been right. If loving Byron means funding your lifestyle, I said quietly, then maybe I need to love him from a distance until he's old enough to understand the difference. Nova's mouth fell open. She'd played her ace, and I'd called her bluff. You're going to regret this, she said, backing toward the taxi. You're going to regret this so much. When you're sitting alone in this house with no family, no grandson, no one who cares about you, remember that you chose this. I watched her get into the taxi and drive away, my heart hammering against my ribs. The threat she'd made wasn't empty. She absolutely would try to keep Byron away from me. David would go along with it because he always went along with whatever Nova wanted. But as I stood there on my porch, something unexpected happened. Instead of the crushing fear I'd expected to feel, I felt relief, because Nova had finally shown me who she really was and who David had chosen to become by extension. They weren't my family, they were people who'd been using me, and when I stopped being useful, They'd shown their true colors immediately. Real family doesn't threaten you with exile for setting boundaries. Real family doesn't punish you for refusing to bankrupt yourself for their comfort. That evening, David called. His voice was tired, defeated in a way I'd never heard before. "Mom, please. Nova told me about your conversation today. She's really upset. I imagine she is. Look, I know things got heated, but we need to work this out. For Byron's sake, if nothing else. What exactly do you want to work out, David? I want my family back together. I want you to be part of Byron's life. I want us to find a way forward." For a moment, hope flickered in my chest. Maybe David was different from Nova. Maybe he could see past the money to what really mattered. "What does that look like to you?" I asked carefully. "Well, obviously we can't just go back to the way things were, but maybe we could work out some kind of arrangement. Maybe you could help with just the essential things, the mortgage, Byron's school. We could cut back on everything else." The hope died as quickly as it had appeared. Even now, even after everything, he was still asking for my money. A reduced amount maybe, but he was still asking. "David," I said softly, "do you understand what happened at Byron's party? It was a misunderstanding." "No, it wasn't. Your wife deliberately humiliated me in front of a room full of people, and you stood there and let her do it. After 15 years of paying for your life, I wasn't even worth a chair at the family table." Silence stretched between us. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "I'm sorry, Mom. I should have said something. I should have defended you." "Yes," I said, "you should have, but you didn't. And that tells me everything I need to know about where I stand in your priorities." "But we can fix this. We can make it right. With my money." "Mom, that's not—" He stopped, catching himself. "It's not just about the money, isn't it? Because every solution you've proposed involves me continuing to pay for your lifestyle." I could hear Nova in the background, her voice sharp and urgent, though I couldn't make out the words. "I have to go," David said abruptly. "But Mom, please think about what you're doing. Please think about Byron." The line went dead. I sat in my kitchen, staring at my phone, and realized something that should have terrified me but somehow didn't. I might never see my grandson again, but I also realized something else. I'd rather lose a family that only valued me for my money than keep paying for the privilege of being treated like garbage. For the first time in 15 years, I was free. And freedom, it turned out, was worth more than all the money I'd ever given them. The silence started immediately. Not the peaceful kind of silence I'd been craving, but the deliberate, punishing kind that felt like being erased from existence. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with requests and demands disguised as family communication, went completely quiet. No good morning texts from David, no photos of Byron from Nova, no calls asking for advice that was really asking for money, nothing. I told myself this was what I wanted. I'd bought my freedom, and silence was the price. But as the days stretched into weeks, the quiet began to feel less like peace and more like punishment. 2 weeks after Nova's visit, I was at the grocery store when I ran into Janet Morrison, Byron's former babysitter. She'd known our family for years, had probably made more money from me than her actual employers since I always paid her extra to take good care of my grandson. "Mrs. Holloway," she called out from the cereal aisle. "I haven't seen you in forever. How's little Byron doing?" The question hit me like a physical blow. How was Byron? I had no idea. He's doing well," I managed. Janet's face lit up. "I heard about the school situation. That must be so hard on all of you. But at least you'll get to see more of him now, right? Silver lining and all that." My blood ran cold. "School situation?" "Oh, having to transfer to public school. Nova mentioned it when she called to see if I could help with after-school care. She said it was just temporary while you all figured things out financially." Janet's expression suddenly shifted as she registered my confusion. Oh no, you didn't know?" I managed to excuse myself and fled to my car, hands shaking as I started the engine. They'd really done it. They'd taken Byron out of his school, the school I'd been paying for, the school he loved, and I was learning about it from a teenager in the cereal aisle. That evening, I did something I hadn't done in 3 weeks. I drove by their house. What I saw made my chest tight with grief. The for sale sign on the front lawn was bad enough, but it was the details that broke my heart. Nova's flower boxes, once overflowing with expensive annuals, were brown and dead. The lawn, usually maintained by a service I'd paid for, was overgrown and patchy. David's truck wasn't in the driveway, probably repossessed like Nova's car, but worst of all was Byron. I could see him through the living room window, sitting alone on the floor in front of the television. The room looked wrong somehow, emptier. They must have sold furniture. I sat in my car across the street, watching my grandson's small figure, and felt like the worst person in the world. This was my fault. I'd done this to him. My phone buzzed with a Facebook notification, something I rarely checked anymore. But tonight, for some reason, I opened it. Nova had posted a photo of Byron at what looked like a school carnival. He was smiling, but it was a forced smile, the kind children learn to wear when adults ask them to pose. The caption made my stomach churn. Byron being brave at his new school's fall festival. Some changes are hard, but we're grateful for the fresh start and the people who truly care about our family. Blessed. New beginnings. Real family. The comments below were a mix of support and curiosity. "What happened?" asked one friend. "Why did you switch schools?" Nova's response was swift and pointed. "Sometimes you find out who your real family is. We're learning to depend on ourselves and the people who actually love us unconditionally." The implication was clear. I was the conditional one. I was the one who'd abandoned them. In Nova's version of events, I was the villain who'd pulled support from an innocent family struggling to make ends meet. I scrolled through more posts, each one a carefully crafted narrative of their hardship. Photos of Byron helping to pack boxes, captioned with something about teaching him the value of hard work. A picture of Nova at what looked like a diner, wearing a uniform. New job, new adventures. Sometimes life takes you in directions you never expected, but we're grateful for every blessing. She'd gotten a job. An actual, full-time job from the looks of it. David appeared in some photos too, looking thinner and more tired than I'd ever seen him, but working. Building a deck, painting a house, doing actual manual labor instead of the sporadic contracting work he'd done when he knew my money would cover any gaps. Part of me felt proud of them for finally taking responsibility for their lives. But a larger part felt sick watching how they'd turned their newfound work ethic into a martyrdom narrative, with me cast as the cruel grandmother who'd abandoned her family in their hour of need. The worst part was seeing Byron in these posts. Not many of them included him. Nova was too smart to exploit her son's sadness for social media points. But when he did appear, he looked smaller somehow. Quieter. In one photo, he was sitting in what was clearly a much smaller, shabbier living room, reading a library book instead of playing with the expensive toys that had once cluttered their house. I wanted to call him, to hear his voice, to tell him that Grandma missed him and loved him. But Nova had made it clear that contact would only happen on her terms, and her terms seemed to be never. 3 weeks after the Facebook discovery, I was watering my garden when Mrs. Patterson from next door called over the fence. "Harriet, dear, are you all right? I've been worried about you." I looked up, surprised. Mrs. Patterson and I had been neighbors for 5 years, but we'd never been particularly close. "I'm fine, thank you. It's just, well, I haven't seen your family around lately. That sweet little boy who used to help you with your flowers. Is everything okay?" The kindness in her voice nearly undid me. "We're taking a break from each other," I managed. She nodded knowingly. "Family can be complicated. My daughter and I went through a rough patch a few years back. Sometimes space is healthy, even when it hurts." "How long were you taking space?" "About 6 months. Longest 6 months of my life, but we needed it. Sometimes you have to lose people to realize what you actually mean to each other." That night, I lay in bed thinking about Mrs. Patterson's words. 6 months. Could I survive 6 months of this silence? What if it lasted longer? What if Byron forgot about me entirely? But then I thought about that birthday party. About sitting alone while Nova held court at the family table. I thought about 15 years of payments, 15 years of being taken for granted, 15 years of being valued only for what I could provide. Maybe some losses were worth the pain. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. Through my peephole, I saw a woman I didn't recognize. Middle-aged, professionally dressed, with a kind but serious expression. "Mrs. Holloway? My name is Sarah Chen. I'm a social worker with Child Protective Services." My blood turned to ice. I opened the door with trembling hands. "Is Byron okay?" "Byron is fine," she assured me quickly. "May I come in? I'd like to ask you a few questions." We sat in my living room, and Sarah pulled out a small notebook. "We received a report expressing concern about a child's welfare. The caller suggested that a family member might be withholding financial support that's necessary for the child's well-being." I stared at her. "Someone called CPS because I stopped giving my son money?" Sarah's expression remained neutral. "Can you tell me about your relationship with your grandson and his parents?" I took a deep breath and told her everything. The years of payments, the birthday party humiliation, the threats and manipulation. Sarah listened without judgment, taking occasional notes. "Mrs. Holloway," she said when I finished, "you're not legally obligated to provide financial support for your adult son's family. The caller seems to have misunderstood how these things work. But Byron is suffering because of my decision. Is he being fed, clothed, and housed? Yes, but not the way he was before. Then he's not suffering, he's adjusting. There's a difference." Sarah closed her notebook. "Children are remarkably resilient, often more resilient than the adults who worry about them." After she left, I sat alone with her words. Byron was resilient. He was adjusting. Maybe this was exactly what he needed to see, that life doesn't revolve around money, that families don't exist to support each other financially, that love isn't something you buy. That evening, I made a decision. I wrote a letter to Byron, not to be sent now, but to be kept for when he was older. In it, I explained everything. Why I'd made the choices I made, how much I loved him, and how I hoped someday he'd understand. I sealed it in an envelope with his name on it and put it in my jewelry box next to my late husband's wedding ring. Someday, when Byron was old enough to make his own decisions about our relationship, he'd have the whole story. Until then, I would wait, and I would try to learn something I'd never been good at: how to love someone without trying to fix everything for them. The silence continued, but it felt different now, less like punishment and more like preparation. I was learning who I was when I wasn't defined by my usefulness to others. It was harder than I'd expected, but also more freeing than I'd dared to hope. The truth came from the most unexpected source: Marie Hendricks, Nova's former best friend. I hadn't spoken to Marie in over 2 years, not since she and Nova had their falling out over something I'd never fully understood. So when she called me on a Tuesday afternoon 4 months after my family had cut me off, I almost didn't answer. "Harriet, it's Marie. I hope you don't mind me calling, but I think there's something you need to know." Her voice was hesitant, nervous. "We made plans to meet at a coffee shop downtown, somewhere neutral where we wouldn't risk running into anyone from our old social circle." Marie looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that went deeper than physical exhaustion. She ordered her coffee black and got straight to the point. "I heard about what happened with you and Nova, about the money situation." I tensed, expecting another lecture about family loyalty or how I was hurting Byron. "What about it?" "She's been telling people you had some kind of breakdown, that you became paranoid and started imagining slights that weren't there." Marie wrapped her hands around her coffee cup like she was trying to warm herself. "But I know that's not true, because I know what she really thought about you." My heart started beating faster. "What do you mean?" Marie took a deep breath. "Remember when we used to have those monthly dinners? The girls' nights when our husbands would watch the kids?" I nodded. Those dinners had stopped around the time Marie and Nova's friendship ended. "Nova used to talk about you. A lot. And not—" Marie's voice trailed off. Then she forced herself to continue. "Not the way a daughter-in-law should talk about her husband's mother." The coffee shop suddenly felt too hot, too crowded. "What did she say?" "She called you her personal ATM. She used to laugh about how easy it was to get money out of you. She'd plan out these elaborate stories about Byron needing something or David's business struggling, and she'd practice her delivery on us." Each word hit me like a physical blow. "Practice her delivery?" "She said the key was making you think you were being generous instead of being used. She'd talk about what buttons to push, your guilt about not being around enough when David was little, your fear of missing out on Byron's childhood, your worry about being seen as stingy." I thought about all those conversations over the years, all those carefully worded requests that had made me feel like such a loving grandmother. The way Nova would mention Byron's disappointment about some toy or experience, then quickly add, "But we understand if it's not in the budget," knowing full well that I'd immediately offer to cover it. "There's more," Marie said quietly. "She used to complain about having to include you in family events. She said David insisted on inviting you to things, but she wished you'd just send a check and stay home." The birthday party. It all made sense now. Nova hadn't forgotten to include me by accident. She'd been working up to excluding me for years. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted to hear the answer. Marie's eyes filled with tears. "Because I was just as bad. I was jealous of how much help you gave them. My mother-in-law was nothing like you, and I used to think Nova was so lucky. I convinced myself she was just venting, that she didn't really mean it. What changed your mind? She tried to get me to lend them money. After you cut them off, she came to me with this sob story about how you'd had a mental breakdown and abandoned them. She wanted $5,000 to help with Byron's school fees." Marie laughed bitterly. "When I said I didn't have that kind of money, she suggested I could take out a credit card cash advance. That's when I realized she really would use anyone." I sat there processing this information, feeling sick and validated at the same time. Sick because the woman I'd treated like a daughter had been laughing at me behind my back for years. Validated because my instincts about the birthday party had been right. It wasn't an accident or a misunderstanding. It was deliberate cruelty. "There's something else," Marie said. "About David." I braced myself. "He knew. About what Nova said. About how she really felt about you. He was there for most of those dinners." The last piece of my heart that had been holding out hope for my son crumbled. It was one thing to be weak, to be manipulated by a controlling wife. It was another thing entirely to sit there while that wife mocked and planned to exploit his own mother. "He never said anything," I whispered. "He laughed, Harriet. He thought it was funny how good Nova was at managing you." I excused myself and went to the bathroom, where I promptly threw up. When I came back, Marie was crying. "I'm so sorry," she said. "I should have told you years ago. I should have been a better friend." I sat down heavily, feeling like I'd aged a decade in the span of an hour. "Thank you for telling me now. For what it's worth, I think you did the right thing. Cutting them off, I mean. Maybe they'll learn something from having to take care of themselves." But as I drove home, I wasn't thinking about whether David and Nova would learn anything. I was thinking about Byron and whether he was learning the wrong lessons about family, about love, about what people owed each other. That evening, I did something I hadn't done since this whole mess started. I drove by their old house. The new owners had already moved in, and the place looked completely different. The dead flower boxes were gone, replaced with simple, tasteful landscaping. Children's bicycles sat in the driveway. A different family was making different memories there. I found myself wondering where David and Nova were living now, what Byron's new school was like, whether he missed his old life or was adapting the way children do. Part of me wanted to find out, to drive around until I spotted David's truck or saw Nova's new car. But what would be the point? Instead, I went home and pulled out the letter I'd written to Byron months earlier. I read it again, then added a new paragraph. "Your parents made choices, Byron, and so did I. I chose to stop letting them take advantage of me, even though I knew it would hurt you in the short term. I hope someday you'll understand that enabling someone isn't the same as loving them, and that the hardest thing about real love is sometimes knowing when to step back and let people face the consequences of their own decisions." I sealed the letter again and put it back in my jewelry box. Then I sat down with a glass of wine and really thought about my life for the first time in years. Who was I when I wasn't defined by my usefulness to David and Nova? What did I actually want to do with my time, my money, my energy? The answers came slowly, but they came. I wanted to travel to places I'd always put off visiting because family obligations came first. I wanted to take art classes, something I'd loved in college but abandoned when life got complicated. I wanted to volunteer somewhere that actually appreciated my help instead of taking it for granted. I wanted to build a life that was mine, not an extension of someone else's needs and wants. The revelation of Nova's true feelings had hurt, but it had also freed me from any lingering guilt about my decision. I hadn't abandoned my family. I'd stopped enabling people who saw me as nothing more than a source of funding. There was a difference, and for the first time since that birthday party, I felt truly at peace with my choice. The silence from David and Nova continued, but it no longer felt like punishment. It felt like freedom. And freedom, I was learning, was worth more than all the gratitude money could buy. 1 year later, I was in my kitchen making tea when the doorbell rang. Through the window, I saw a figure I didn't immediately recognize. A thin boy with unruly brown hair, shifting nervously from foot to foot on my front porch. It took me a moment to realize it was Byron. He'd grown at least 3 inches, and there was something different about his face. Less round, more serious. He looked like a child who'd learned things he shouldn't have had to learn yet. My hands shook as I opened the door. "Byron?" "Hi, Grandma." His voice was quieter than I remembered, more careful. "Dad said I could come see you if I wanted to. He's waiting in the car." I looked past him and saw David's truck parked at the curb. David himself sat behind the wheel, staring straight ahead. He didn't wave or acknowledge me, but he'd brought Byron here. That had to mean something. "Would you like to come in?" I asked, stepping aside. Byron nodded and followed me into the living room. He perched on the edge of the couch like he was ready to run at any moment, and my heart broke a little at how uncertain he seemed. "How are you, sweetheart?" "I'm okay." The automatic response of a child who'd learned not to complain. "I like my new school. It's smaller than my old one, but it's okay." "And your mom and dad?" Byron's expression shuddered slightly. "They're okay too. Dad works a lot now. Mom works at a restaurant. She's really tired all the time." I wanted to ask a million questions, but something about Byron's careful answers warned me to go slow. Instead, I said, "Are you hungry? I could make you a sandwich." A ghost of a smile crossed his face. "Do you still have those cookies? The ones with the chocolate chips?" "I think I can find some." I'd actually baked a batch just last week, hoping foolishly that somehow Byron might show up to eat them. In the kitchen, as I arranged cookies on a plate, Byron wandered around my house like he was reacquainting himself with a place from a dream. He stopped in front of my refrigerator, where I used to display all his school pictures and artwork. "You took them down," he said quietly. "The photos. I'd packed them away months ago because looking at them hurt too much. I thought you might not want me to have them anymore." Byron considered this with the gravity of someone much older than 9. "Can I see them?" I retrieved the box from my bedroom closet and spread the pictures across my kitchen table. Byron studied them intently, picking up a drawing he'd made in first grade of our family, stick figures holding hands under a bright yellow sun. "I remember making this," he said. "You put it on your refrigerator right away. It was beautiful. It still is." Byron set the drawing down and looked at me directly for the first time since he'd arrived. "Mom says you stopped loving us." The words hit me like a physical blow. I sat down across from him, choosing my response carefully. "What do you think?" "I think—" Byron paused, biting his lip the way he always did when he was thinking hard. "I think maybe you just got tired of being sad." The wisdom in his simple statement took my breath away. "What makes you think I was sad?" "You always looked sad at our house, even when you were smiling, like when you gave me presents or came to my games. You looked happy, but also sad underneath." I had to swallow hard before I could speak. "You're very observant. Mom and Dad used to fight about you sometimes. After you left, Dad said Mom was mean to you, and Mom said you were mean first. But I don't think you're mean, Grandma. What do you think?" Byron picked up a cookie and took a small bite, clearly organizing his thoughts. "I think grown-ups make things too complicated. I missed you, but Mom said you didn't want to see me anymore because you were mad at her and Dad." "That's not true." "Byron, I wanted to see you every single day. Then why didn't you call me?" The question I'd been dreading. How do you explain to a 9-year-old that his parents had used him as a weapon? That love sometimes means stepping back instead of fighting? Because I thought it might make things harder for you. Sometimes adults have to make decisions that don't feel good but might be better in the long run. Byron nodded solemnly. "Like when you made Dad get a real job?" The comment caught me off guard. "What do you mean?" "Dad works really hard now. He gets up early and comes home tired, but I don't know, different. Less worried all the time. And Mom too. She complains about her job, but she seems prouder than before. I studied my grandson's face, seeing maturity there that hadn't existed a year ago. Are you proud of them? Yeah, Byron said without hesitation. It was scary at first when we had to move and change schools and everything, but now it feels more real, I guess. Like we're doing it ourselves instead of… He trailed off. Instead of what? Instead of pretending. The word hung in the air between us. This child had understood something that had taken me years to figure out, that the life I'd been funding wasn't real. It was a performance, a beautiful illusion built on someone else's foundation. Byron, I said carefully, do you understand why I stopped helping with money? He nodded. Because they were being mean to you, and because they needed to learn how to take care of themselves. Are you angry with me? Byron considered this seriously. I was at first. I missed my old room and my old school and having money for things I wanted, but then I realized I still had everything important. Like what? Like mom and dad, and my friends. I made new ones, and books from the library instead of always buying new ones, and… He smiled shyly. And now I'm here with you. I reached across the table and took his small hand in mine. I missed you so much. I missed you too. That's why I asked Dad if I could come see you. You asked him? Last week. I told him I understood why you were upset, and that I wanted to see if you still loved me. The simple honesty of it brought tears to my eyes. What did he say? He said he'd been wanting to bring me for a while, but he was scared you'd be mad at him. Byron squeezed my hand. Are you mad at him? I looked out the window at David's truck, where my son sat waiting for his child to finish visiting the grandmother he'd helped alienate. I'm sad about some things that happened, but I love your dad, and I love you. What about Mom? The harder question. I hope your mom is learning to be happy with the life she and your dad are building together. Byron seemed to accept this diplomatic non-answer. We spent the next hour looking through photo albums and talking about his new school, his new friends, his new life. He told me about helping his dad with work projects on weekends, about his mom teaching him to cook simple meals, about feeling proud when his teacher complimented his improved math skills. The boy who'd once had everything handed to him was discovering the satisfaction of earning things himself. When it was time to go, Byron hugged me tight. Can I come see you again? Anytime you want to, but you should ask your parents first. I will. He pulled back and looked at me seriously. Grandma? I think what you did was brave. What do you mean? You stopped pretending too. That's brave. As I watched David's truck pull away, Byron waving from the passenger window, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Complete peace. Not the fragile peace that depends on everything going your way, but the deep, lasting peace that comes from living authentically. I'd lost a son and daughter-in-law who only valued me for my money, but I'd found myself again, and apparently, I hadn't lost my grandson after all. Byron had found his way back to me on his own terms, with his own understanding of what had happened. 6 months after Byron's first visit, he started coming over every other Saturday. David would drop him off and pick him up, and gradually, those exchanges became less tense. We never discussed the past directly, but I could see in David's eyes a grudging respect for the choice I'd made. Nova never came with them, and I was fine with that. Some relationships can't be repaired, and trying to force reconciliation often makes things worse. But Byron and I rebuilt our relationship slowly, on a foundation of honesty instead of obligation. I taught him to garden and cook and manage money responsibly. He taught me that love doesn't require funding, and that sometimes the greatest gift you can give someone is the opportunity to discover their own strength. On my 70th birthday, Byron gave me a card he'd made himself. Inside, in his careful handwriting, were the words, "Thank you for teaching me that real love doesn't cost anything." I kept that card next to the letter I'd written him during our separation, the letter I'd never had to give him because he'd figured out the truth all by himself. That night, I sat on my back porch with a glass of wine, listening to the sounds of my neighbors living their lives. Mrs. Patterson called over the fence to ask how my birthday had been. A young family down the street was having a barbecue, their laughter drifting through the evening air. I was alone, but I wasn't lonely. I was free, but I wasn't isolated. I had learned the difference between being loved and being used, and I had chosen love, even when it meant losing people who couldn't tell the difference. The woman who'd sat silently at that birthday party, too afraid to demand the respect she deserved, was gone. In her place was someone stronger, someone who understood that you can't buy your way into a family that truly loves you, because a family that truly loves you would never make you try. Now I'm curious about you who listened to my story. What would you do if you were in my place? Have you ever been through something similar? Comment below, and meanwhile I'm leaving on the final screen 2 other stories that are channel favorites, and they will definitely surprise you. Thank you for watching until here.